This podcast is brought to you by Again and Forever.
Welcome back to the AI Analysis Podcast. Today we're taking a look at a movie that's as controversial as it is memorable, and honestly, there are two versions of the film that are worlds apart.
They really are. It's genuinely a case study in how editing can make or break a story. We are, of course, talking about Ridley Scott's 2005 epic Kingdom of Heaven.
I remember this so vividly when it came out. The hype was, it was absolutely palpable. You have to remember the context of the mid-2000s.
Oh, yeah.
Ridley Scott had basically resurrected the entire sword and sandal genre just, 5 years earlier with Gladiator?
Right, an Oscar winner, a cultural phenomenon.
Exactly. So the idea that he was returning to historical epics, that was a massive deal. It felt like this was going to be the next Gladiator.
It was positioned as the cinematic event of the year, at least on paper.
And then you just look at the cast. Orlando Bloom at that moment was probably the biggest heartthrob on the planet.
Unquestionably. He was coming straight off Lord of the Rings as Legolas and Pirates of the Caribbean as Will Turner.
He was on every magazine cover.
Yeah.
Just everywhere. And then you throw in Liam Neeson, Eva Green, Jeremy Irons, and uncredited Edward Norton.
Ghassan Massoud as Saladin, who is just phenomenal. The cast was absolutely stacked.
And they were tackling this massive, really heavy historical subject, the Crusades. Specifically, the events right before the Third Crusade, so the fall of Jerusalem in 1187.
And that's such a dense period of history. It's incredibly complex and, frankly, really difficult to distill into a 2-hour movie.
Yeah, how do you even start?
Well, you're dealing with religious politics, feudal laws, these intricate family trees of the Crusader states, and a geopolitical situation that is, confusing even for professional historians.
Right.
And that difficulty, that complexity is really at the heart of what we're talking about today. Because the version of the film that most people saw in theaters, well, let's just say it left a lot to be desired.
That's putting it very, very politely. I think muddled was the word a lot of the critics used back then.
It was.
People walked out of the theater just confused. Who is who? Why were things happening? And more importantly, why should they even care about this Balian guy?
Mm-hmm. But then this other version surfaces, the director's cut, and all of a sudden people are calling it a masterpiece.
A misunderstood masterpiece?
Exactly. So the mission for our discussion today is pretty clear. We're going to analyze the story, we'll look at the modern context, specifically how a movie made just a few years after 9/11 handles a Christian-Muslim conflict, and we're going to do a serious reality check on the history.
Because what Hollywood showed us was one thing.
And what the 12th century actually was, that's something very, very different.
It's just such a unique story.
Yeah.
A box office disappointment that somehow becomes a cult classic.
It's a rare trajectory. Usually if a movie flops, it just stays flopped. But this one found a whole second life.
So let's get into it. We have to start with this tale of two films, because I really feel like you can't even have a conversation about Kingdom of Heaven without first asking, okay, which version are we talking about?
You really can't. It's almost like discussing two completely different pieces of art that just happen to share the same actors and sets.
So let's set the scene. May 2005, you walk into a movie theater.
You sit down for a movie that runs about 144 minutes, and the reception was mixed, to be generous.
It's got a 39% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, 39% is rough for a Ridley Scott movie. That's not just mixed, that's getting into bad movie territory.
It is. And the criticism was pretty consistent across the board. Critics were saying it lacked depth, or that the battles were just a gray smudge of action.
I remember that. The story just felt jumpy. Characters would show up and then disappear with no real explanation. Their motivations were thin.
Very thin. And the box office reflected that. In the U.S., it only made about $47 million.
Against a budget of what?
$130 million.
Oh, wow. So that is a bomb. A significant financial loss for the studio, at least domestically.
Domestically, yes. A huge bomb. It did much better overseas, especially in Europe and the Arab world. It pulled in a total of around $211 million worldwide. But the story in the U.S., in Hollywood, was that it was a failure. A boring, confused, expensive failure.
And Ridley Scott, he wasn't exactly quiet about this, was he? Usually directors will defend their film to the death, but he seemed to distance himself from that theatrical version pretty quickly.
Not happy is an understatement. He's been incredibly vocal over the years that the theatrical cut was, in his words, watered down.
By the studio, you mean?
Oh,
By
yeah.
Fox.
Exactly. You have to understand the pressure they were under. They held preview screenings, and the feedback from test audiences was that the movie was too long, too complicated.
The classic studio note.
The classic studio note. They got nervous, they looked at it, and decided they wanted an action-adventure with a love story. They essentially wanted a gladiator in Jerusalem.
Right, they wanted a straightforward hero's journey. Big fights, simple romance, none of this complicated religious stuff.
Precisely. They wanted that "are you not entertained" energy, so they chopped it up.
And what got cut?
The soul of the movie, basically. They removed complex character motivations. They completely cut out an entire subplot involving the female lead's child, which we have to get to that because it's absolutely crucial to the story.
Okay.
And what was left was this really disjointed series of battle scenes with almost no connective tissue. They tried to force a historical epic about theology and conscience into the mold of a summer blockbuster, and in doing so, they broke the movie.
Okay, so that's the theatrical cut, a broken movie. But then just a few months later, December 2005.
The redemption. The director's cut is released on DVD.
And Scott himself basically said, this is the real movie.
He calls it the one that should have gone out, and the difference is staggering. It's not just a few deleted scenes. We're talking about a massive 45 minutes of additional footage.
45 minutes.
45. The running time jumps from 144 minutes to about 194 minutes. That's over 3 hours long.
That's like adding an entire episode of a TV drama back into the film. That's a third of the story that was just gone.
Precisely. And the critical reevaluation was almost instantaneous. It went from being seen as this mixed to negative film to being overwhelmingly praised.
So what did that extra time do?
It gave it room to breathe. Empire magazine had a great line. They described the added footage as pieces missing from a beautiful but incomplete puzzle.
That's a good way to put it.
Some critics even argue it's the most substantial and important director's cut of all time, maybe even rivaling Blade Runner.
Wow.
Because it adds all that missing depth. The character motivations suddenly make sense. Specifically, the story of Sibylla, the princess, and her son, that whole subplot is restored, and it entirely changes the emotional weight of the third act. It transforms the film from a simple action movie into a genuine tragedy.
It's amazing what context can do. Suddenly, characters aren't just doing things because the script says so. They're doing them because we actually saw this setup an hour ago.
Right. It becomes a coherent narrative.
But okay, even with the director's cut being a much, much better film, we still have to talk about some of the storytelling choices. Because even the best version of this movie relies pretty heavily on some, let's call them classic Hollywood tropes.
And I think I know which one you're going to start with.
The fish out of water trope.
Of course.
This is one of my biggest pet peeves in historical fiction. So let's talk about our protagonist, Balian, played by Orlando Bloom. In the movie, who is he? He's a blacksmith in France.
Right. His life is terrible. He's illegitimate. His wife has just died by suicide after a miscarriage. He's in a really dark place.
And then his long-lost noble father, Liam Neeson, just shows up and says, "Hey, son, I never knew. Come with me to the Holy Land."
And from a narrative perspective, you can see why they did that. Making him an outsider, a simple blacksmith, serves a specific purpose for the audience.
He's our surrogate.
Exactly. He gets to ask the questions the audience needs answered. Who are those guys in the white tunics? What is a Muslim? Why is everyone fighting? If he were an expert on the Crusader states, he wouldn't need to ask. And the audience wouldn't get the exposition.
Sure, I get the utility of it. It's screenwriting 101. But the execution of it in this film is a little much.
A little much, yeah.
We have a source here from history buffs that really breaks down what they call the instant expert problem. Balian goes from a rural blacksmith to an expert swordsman after literally one lesson around a campfire.
The famous high guard scene.
Yes. His dad gives him this one piece of advice: take a high guard. The Italians call it la posta di falcone. And the next thing you know, Balian is holding his own against professional lifelong soldiers.
It's a bit absurd when you really scrutinize it. The critique is that he just has this completely inexplicable skill set that appears out of nowhere.
Right. He's a blacksmith. But then he gets to his new estate in Ibelin, and suddenly he understands advanced irrigation and engineering well enough to make water appear in the desert.
And then he gets to Jerusalem, and suddenly he understands strategic siege defense better than veteran commanders who have been fighting there for decades. He's giving military advice to the king of Jerusalem on how to fortify the city.
It's that competence porn trope. The hero is just instantly good at everything he tries. It makes for cool power fantasy, but it really breaks the suspension of disbelief if you think about it for more than 5 seconds.
It does. So let's talk about the reality. Who was the real Balian of Ibelin? Was he a French blacksmith?
I'm guessing no?
Not even close. The real Balian of Ibelin was a major nobleman. He was born and raised in the Holy Land.
So he wasn't even French.
Well, he was of French descent, the Frankish nobility, but he was a native of the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem. He wasn't a blacksmith. He was a key political figure, a baron, a product of that highly complex environment. He didn't need to learn the world of the Crusades. He was an integral part of it.
So he wouldn't have needed someone to explain who Saladin was.
He would have known Saladin's politics intimately. He probably spoke Arabic. He understood the treaties, the factions, the family connections. The film essentially merges the historical Balian with his own father, Barrisan, who was the founder of the Ibelin house, to create this rags-to-riches origin story.
And in doing that, they strip away the fact that Balian was a high-ranking insider, not some scrappy outsider who lucked into nobility.
And that choice, making him an outsider, it also feeds into this other thing the movie does, this visual bias. We have to talk about the color grading.
Oh, yeah.
Have you noticed how the movie paints Europe versus the Middle East?
It's so stark. It's so deliberate. The opening scenes in France are just cold. It's all blues and grays and mud. It gets miserable.
It feels repressive and impoverished and superstitious. You have that scene where the corrupt priest steals the silver cross from Balian's dead wife. It's just relentlessly grim.
And then they get to Jerusalem.
And it's like someone flipped a switch on the color filter. Suddenly everything is gold and orange and yellow. It's vibrant, it's warm. The markets are bustling with life. The architecture is beautiful. It's depicted as this advanced, civilized, clean place.
It's the Dark West versus the Golden East. But,
Yeah.
I mean, is that a fair depiction? Was Europe just a muddy backwater in 1184?
Not at all. And this is a major historical complaint about the film. By 1184, Europe was actually in the middle of what historians call the 12th century Renaissance.
A Renaissance. I thought that was, much later.
That's the more famous Italian Renaissance. But there was this earlier period of massive intellectual and cultural growth. You had the rise of the first universities, like in Paris and Oxford and Bologna.
So not just superstitious peasants in the mud.
No, not at all. You had the beginnings of Gothic architecture, a huge boom in literature and philosophy. It was a dynamic, complex, and evolving society.
And the film makes it seem like the East is the only place with any culture or hygiene.
Right. And it also ignores the fact that there was already a massive cultural exchange happening for almost a century by that point. The Franks living in the Crusader states had adopted many local customs, foods, and hygiene practices. The film paints this simple, binary backward Europe versus enlightened East, which serves a very modern narrative, but historically both societies were complex, advancing, and deeply, deeply religious.
It definitely feels like the movie is trying to make a very specific point, rather than just tell a historical story, which I think brings us to the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
This movie came out in 2005.
Right.
That's just 4 years after September 11, 2001.
Mm-hmm.
You just cannot separate a movie about a Christian-Muslim war in the Middle East from the context of the War on Terror.
You absolutely cannot. And when you look at the academic critiques of the film, this is where the conversation gets really, really heated.
Okay, let's take a quick break to thank our sponsors. When we get back, we're going to dive right into the politics of Kingdom of Heaven. Was this movie really a commentary on the Iraq War, just disguised as a medieval epic? Stay with us. Welcome back. Before the break, we were just getting into the modern context of Kingdom of Heaven. It's 2005. The world is still grappling with the fallout of 9/11. How much did that political climate influence this script?
Oh, immensely. I think it's fair to say it's the primary lens through which the story is told. Many scholars and historians have pointed out that the film imposes 21st century morals onto 12th century characters.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there was this desperate need in the cultural conversation of 2005 to show that not everyone is a fanatic. There's a push for moderation. So the film works very, very hard to create good secular moderates on both sides of the conflict and then bad religious fanatics on both sides.
So it's not Christian versus Muslim, it's moderate versus extremist.
Exactly, which is a very 21st century way of framing the conflict, and this is where some of the harshest criticism came from. I know you've seen the quote from the historian Jonathan Riley Smith.
Yeah, he was. He was not a fan.
No, he was scathing. He famously called the film Osama bin Laden's version of history.
Wow. I mean, that is a heavy charge. That's not just a critique of historical accuracy. That's an accusation of spreading dangerous propaganda.
It is. His argument was that the film validates a specific extremist narrative which was being used at the time. The idea that the Crusades were purely acts of unprovoked Western aggression and greed, and that the Muslims were simply peaceful people defending themselves against barbaric invaders.
And he felt that was dangerous.
He felt it was dangerous to Arab relations because it reinforced a modern grievance narrative that was being actively used by extremists to justify their own actions. Another historian, Thomas F. Madden, basically said the same thing, that there's this massive gulf between what historians actually know about the Crusades and what this movie depicts.
So how did Ridley Scott respond to that kind of criticism?
Well, he defended his choices. He argued he was taking a contemporary look at history. His goal wasn't to make a documentary. He wanted to make the story accessible and relevant to modern audiences. And he did that by, in his words, exaggerating the piece to fit modern ideals. He was essentially making a parable for 2005.
That explains that recurring motif of Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, peace be with you. It's said constantly in the film by both Christians and Muslims.
It's the film's thesis statement almost.
It is. It's the theme. The film is desperately searching for common ground and a path to peace. And that desire directly shapes how the two religions are represented. If you look at the Christians in the film, the ones who are explicitly religious, the clergy, the Knights Templar, are almost universally depicted as the villains.
Oh, yeah. The Templars are just these wild-eyed, bloodthirsty maniacs. I think they're called Templar bastards a few times.
They are.
They're just constantly shouting, God wills it, and trying to provoke a war. They come across as an unhinged death cult.
Which is a complete caricature. Historically, the Knights Templar were a military order, yes, but they were incredibly disciplined. They were the elite special forces of their day. Their job was to protect pilgrims on the roads.
They weren't just chaotic raiders.
No, they had strict rules and strategic goals. They were also international bankers, diplomats, and landowners. To portray them as just these frothing madmen simplifies the entire conflict into good secular knights versus bad religious knights.
And then on the other side of that coin, you have Saladin.
Right, played by Ghassan Massoud. And it's an incredible performance. His presence on screen is just magnetic.
It is, but the character as written is. He's very modern.
He's depicted as wise, restrained, philosophical, and essentially a secular humanist. You have that famous scene after he captures Jerusalem where he finds a fallen crucifix, and he gently picks it up and places it back on a table.
It's a great scene. Visually, it says so much about tolerance and respect in just a single gesture.
It's a beautiful cinematic moment. But historically, it's highly unlikely. Saladin was a devout Muslim engaged in what he saw as a holy war, a jihad to reclaim a holy city. He wasn't a modern secular humanist who saw all paths to God as equal.
So he wouldn't have revered a Christian symbol.
He would have more likely seen the cross as a symbol of the enemy's error, or perhaps even as an idol. The film consistently strips its good characters of their actual medieval religious motivations to make them palatable to us, to a modern audience.
So the implication is that to be good, you have to be less religious.
Pretty much. It suggests that the only path to peace is for everyone to stop taking their religion so seriously. And that's a very modern, Western, secular viewpoint that would have made absolutely no sense to the real people of 1187, for whom religious conviction was the defining feature of their entire existence.
It's projecting our hopes for our world onto theirs.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's move from the broad politics to the specific personalities. Because aside from Balian, the most memorable character in this whole film has to be King Baldwin IV.
The Leper King.
Played by Edward Norton, who is just fantastic. And he's uncredited in the theatrical release, right?
That's right. He wanted the mystery of the character to be total. He felt that having his name on the poster would distract from the man behind the mask.
That's such a cool actor move. And the performance is incredible. He's behind this silver mask the entire time, but you feel his authority, his pain, his intelligence.
You do.
In the film, he's portrayed as this pacifist, a pluralist philosopher king. He's the one holding the whole thing together, trying to maintain the peace. He wants Jerusalem to be a kingdom of conscience where everyone can live together.
Which, again, fits the movie's overall theme perfectly. But the historical Baldwin IV, he was a warrior.
A warrior, the man with leprosy.
Absolutely. He was a leper, yes, and by all accounts, he suffered terribly from the disease. But he was not sitting in a palace waxing poetic about peace. He was an active military commander. At the age of just 16, when the disease was already taking hold, he led the Crusader army from the front at the Battle of Montgassard, and he defeated Saladin. A massive, massive upset victory against a much larger army.
So the movie totally downplays his military side.
It completely erases it. It shows him as this frail, dying man trying to hold onto a fragile peace. In reality, he was an active field commander who fought from horseback, even when he became so crippled that he had to be strapped into the saddle and had lost the use of his hands.
That's an incredible image.
He was terrifying to his enemies because he was this dying boy who just kept winning battles.
And what about the mask? The silver mask is so iconic. I've seen it everywhere. Memes, fan art, everything.
It's iconic, but it's almost certainly a Hollywood invention.
Really?
There's no historical record of him wearing a silver mask. He likely used veils or scarves to hide his disfigurement as the disease got worse, but the ornate metal mask is pure cinema. It looks amazing, it has this great man in the iron mask vibe, but it's an aesthetic choice.
It's a brilliant choice, though. It gives him this ghostly, almost inhuman, statue-like presence.
Oh, it's a fantastic artistic choice. It's just not a historical one.
And then you have his interactions with Balian. There's that scene where the king, the ruler of the whole kingdom, asks Balian, the random blacksmith he just met, for advice on the city's fortifications.
Which is, of course, historically absurd. As we established, the real Balian was a major baron, so the king asking his advice would have made perfect sense. But the king of Jerusalem asking a random French blacksmith how to defend a city, that's just the movie again, trying to elevate the protagonist at the expense of everyone else. It minimizes the king's own knowledge just to make Balian look smarter.
Okay, let's talk about the women in the film, or I should say the woman, Sibylla.
Played by Eva Green. And in the film, her story is one of tragedy. She's trapped in this loveless, politically motivated marriage to the villain, Guy de Lucien.
And she has a passionate affair with Balian.
Right. But in the director's cut, her story gets much darker. It has this incredibly tragic arc that involves her young son.
The poisoning scene, that scene is just, it's brutal.
It's heartbreaking. She discovers that her son has inherited leprosy, the same disease that killed her brother, King Baldwin. And to save him from that lifetime of suffering, she euthanizes him by pouring poison in his ear while he sleeps.
Eva Green's performance in that scene is just devastating. And it's completely made up for the movie.
100% fiction. There is absolutely no historical evidence that Sibylla poisoned her son. Her son, Baldwin Feet, did die very young. He was only about 8 or 9 years old. But it was almost certainly from natural causes or some childhood illness, which was tragically common at the time.
So why did the movie invent that?
It gives her a really complex, tragic depth, and from a plot perspective, it clears the way for her villainous husband, Guy, to take the throne, making the coming disaster a direct result of her tragic choice. It makes her complicit in the kingdom's fall.
And what about her relationship with Guy? In the movie, she absolutely hates him. She looks at him with this pure, unadulterated disgust in every scene they share.
And history tells a very, very different story. By all accounts, the real Sibylla was actually devoted to Guy de Lusignan. She liked him. She seems to have genuinely loved him. Politically, the other barons couldn't stand Guy. They thought he was weak, arrogant, and incompetent. Before they would agree to crown Sibylla as queen, they made her promise to divorce him.
And she agreed.
She agreed, but with one condition, that once she was queen, she would be allowed to choose her own new husband.
Ah, okay. That's a smart move.
A very smart move. So the barons agree. They crown her as the sole queen of Jerusalem. And then, at the coronation ceremony for her new husband, she immediately chooses Guy.
She totally tricked them.
She completely outmaneuvered the entire nobility of the kingdom to keep her husband by her side. She took the crown off her own head and placed it on his, crowning him king. The movie strips her of all this political agency and cleverness and just makes her a passive victim of a bad marriage. The real Sibylla was a major power player who defied everyone for the man she loved.
That's incredible. The real Sibylla sounds way more interesting than the movie version. The film's version is sort of a tragic romantic lead, but the real woman sounds like a character out of Game of Thrones.
And that's often the case, isn't it? Reality is frequently more complex and interesting than fiction.
So then we have the outright villains.
Yeah.
Guy de Lusignan and his buddy, Reynaud of Chatillon. In the movie, they are basically cartoon bad guys.
They're very one-dimensional.
Yeah, they got the evil beards. They're always shouting, "Give me a war!" They just seem to want blood and chaos for the sake of it.
And historically, they were definitely the hawkish faction. They were the war party. They believed peace with Saladin was impossible and war was inevitable. And Reynaud of Chatillon, well, he was a real piece of work.
He's the one who keeps attacking the caravans during the Crusades. Right?
Yes. Reynaud was a known truce breaker. He attacked civilian caravans, and he even launched a naval raid down the Red Sea that threatened the holy city of Mecca itself. That, in particular, absolutely enraged Saladin and made things personal.
So the movie gets his actions right.
It gets the actions right, but it removes the logic. In the film, he and Guy just seem like chaotic idiots who are greedy for war. In reality, there was a strategic logic, however flawed, to their aggression.
Which was what?
They believed that Saladin's empire was a coalition that was still fragile. They saw him gathering strength year after year, and they believed that a preemptive, decisive war now was better than waiting to be slowly strangled later. They thought if they could force a major battle and break Saladin's army, they could shatter his coalition and secure the kingdom's future.
They were wrong.
They were catastrophically wrong. But they weren't just mindless villains shouting for blood. They had a strategy. It was just a terrible one that led directly to disaster.
Which brings us to that disaster, the big showdown.
The Battle of Hattin.
The turning point of the entire history of the Crusades.
In the movie, we don't actually see the battle itself. We see the army marching to it, and then we see the horrible aftermath. The bodies, the vultures, the silence, which was probably a smart choice, maybe for budget reasons, but it works cinematically. It leaves the horror to your imagination. The film shows Guy making the fatal decision to march the entire army into the desert away from water.
And Balian warns him not to. He says, "You'll be marching them to their deaths."
And Guy ignores him out of arrogance, and that part of it is largely accurate. The Battle of Hattin, fought in July of 1187, was a catastrophe caused primarily by dehydration.
In the middle of summer.
In the middle of a Middle Eastern summer, Guy marched the heavily armored army across an arid plateau. Saladin's forces harried them the whole way and then surrounded them, cutting off their access to the only nearby source of water, the Sea of Galilee. He essentially just waited for them to collapse from thirst and heat stroke before he attacked.
So the Crusader army basically defeated itself before the battle even started.
In many ways, yes. It was one of the single greatest strategic blunders in military history. The film captures the horror of that aftermath perfectly. And then there's that specific scene in Saladin's tent.
After the battle where he has the captured leaders.
Yes. Saladin offers a cup of iced water to the captured King Guy. Guy drinks from it and then passes the cup to Reynaud of Chatillon.
And Saladin gets furious.
He says, "I did not give this cup to him," because in Arab customs of time, if you offer a prisoner food or drink, you are granting them hospitality, which means you cannot then kill them.
So by refusing to give the cup to Reynaud himself,
Saladin was signaling, "You are a dead man, you get no mercy from me." And then he personally executes Reynaud right there in the tent. That entire scene is taken straight from the historical chronicles.
that is chilling. It's so specific. It shows Saladin operating by this very strict, very personal code of conduct.
Absolutely. So Hattin is a disaster. The Christian army is annihilated. The king is a prisoner. The Holy Cross is captured. And now Saladin is marching on Jerusalem itself. And the only one left to defend it is Balian.
This is the climax of the film, the Great Siege of Jerusalem.
And in the movie, Balian makes the choice to stay. He knows it's a lost cause, but he takes charge because there's no one else left.
And how does that compare to the real story?
It's surprisingly true. The real Balian had actually sworn an oath to Saladin after Hattin that he would not take up arms against him again. He only asked for safe passage into Jerusalem to rescue his wife, Maria Comnena, and their children and get them out.
So he intended to leave.
He did. But when he got inside the city, the people begged him to stay and lead the defense. The Patriarch of Jerusalem, the highest religious leader, then formally absolved him of his oath to Saladin, arguing that his duty to defend Christendom was greater than his oath to an infidel.
That's a great moral conflict. He has to break his personal word to save the people.
A huge conflict. So he agrees to stay, and then we get that really famous speech where he knights everyone.
Yeah, the rise and knight scene. It's so stirring. He has all the men-at-arms, even common citizens, kneel, and he just knights them all.
A fantastic cinematic moment. He says, "Nobility is in your actions, not your birth."
Did anything like that actually happen? Because it feels very Hollywood, very democratic and power to the people.
It sort of happened, but it was a little different. It wasn't quite the mass democratic gesture the movie portrays. He didn't just knight the stable boys and the water carriers. He knighted about 60 prominent burgesses, so wealthy citizens, merchants, in order to create a command structure. He desperately needed officers.
It was a practical military necessity.
Exactly. He promoted the leading men of the city to the rank of knight so they could command sections of the wall. It was about creating a leadership cadre, not necessarily a grand statement about social equality. But it makes for a great movie scene.
It does. It fits the character they built for Balian perfectly.
It's the culmination of his arc as the man of the people.
Okay, let's talk about the siege itself.
Yeah.
Because the movie goes big. You have these massive trebuchets throwing giant fireballs, huge siege towers collapsing. It looks like something out of Lord of the Rings.
It's very spectacular. It's very Hollywood. Siege towers like that did exist, but they were incredibly rare and unbelievably expensive to build. If one of them was destroyed, it was a massive, massive loss of resources.
And the constant barrage of exploding fireballs.
That's also exaggerated for effect. They did use incendiaries, but the idea of these constant explosions is more modern warfare than medieval. Thermal shock tactics, heating a stone wall and then dousing it with cold water to make it crack, were actually more common.
What about those white stones Balian puts out in the desert? The range markers.
400.
Yeah. He uses them to mark the distance for his archers and catapults.
That's almost certainly a Hollywood invention. It's a very clever visual shorthand to show the audience that Balian is a smart, prepared commander, but there's no historical evidence that was a standard tactic. It communicates good tactics to the audience very quickly and clearly, which is good storytelling, even if it's not in the history books.
But no matter how clever he is, eventually the walls are breached and we get to the surrender negotiation.
This is one of the most interesting and actually one of the most accurate parts of the film. Balian meets Saladin face to face for a parley.
And Balian threatens him. He says, if you don't give us terms, we will destroy the city.
He threatens to burn it all down. He says, I will destroy the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and I will burn the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. He essentially threatens to commit spiritual suicide for the entire city, destroying the holy sites of both religions.
And that works.
It did, historically. This is one of the moments the movie absolutely nails. Balian leveraged the destruction of the city to force Saladin to the negotiating table. Saladin was a conqueror, but he didn't want to rule over a pile of rubble and ash, especially not if his own faith's holy sites were destroyed. He wanted Jerusalem intact, so he agreed to terms.
And the terms in the movie are that everyone gets to leave peacefully.
In the movie, Saladin is shown as being very benevolent, granting safe conduct to everyone, rich and poor. In reality, it was more of a business transaction. The agreement was that the citizens could ransom themselves.
Oh, so if you had money, you could leave.
Right. If you could pay the ransom, you were free to go. If you couldn't pay, you were sold into slavery.
The movie conveniently leaves out the slavery part.
It does gloss over that pretty significantly. Now, to be fair, Saladin was far, far more merciful than the first Crusaders had been in 1099. They massacred almost everyone in the city. So his actions were seen as very chivalrous for the time. But it wasn't quite the free pass for everyone that the movie suggests. Thousands of poor Christians who couldn't pay were taken as slaves. Still, Balian's negotiations saved tens of thousands of lives from a certain massacre.
So Balian saves the people, he surrenders the city. And that brings us to the ending of the film. He goes back to France, he's working in his old blacksmith shop, and King Richard the Lionheart rides up with his army on the way to the Third Crusade. He's looking for Balian of Ibelin, the great defender of Jerusalem, and Balian just says, I am the blacksmith.
I am the blacksmith. It's the classic hero refusing the call to adventure again. He's done with war, he's found his peace. He just wants a quiet life.
It's a perfect Hollywood ending. He gets the girl, Sibyl goes with him, and they walk off to live happily ever after in obscurity.
And it is completely 100% false.
He didn't go back to France.
Balian of Ibelin never went back to France. Why would he? His home, his family, his entire life was in the Holy Land. He remained one of the most powerful lords in the rump state of the Kingdom of Jerusalem for the rest of his life.
So he didn't ride off into the sunset with Sibylla either.
Nope, he didn't marry Sibylla. He was already married to the Dowager Queen Maria Comnene, and he most certainly did not reject Richard the Lionheart. In fact, he was a key advisor to Richard during the Third Crusade.
So he was a major player right to the end.
Absolutely. He helped negotiate the Treaty of Jaffa, which was the treaty that ended the Third Crusade. He negotiated it directly with Richard and Saladin. The movie wants him to be this humble everyman who walks away from power, because Hollywood loves a hero who doesn't want power. The reality is, he was a consummate power broker who stayed in the game and helped shape the future of the kingdom.
It's funny because the movie wants us to admire him for walking away from it all, but the reality of him sticking around to help manage the difficult peace and rebuild is actually kind of more impressive in a way.
I agree completely. It shows a commitment to his people and his land that goes far beyond just finding his personal salvation. It shows a deep sense of responsibility.
So, okay, we've torn apart the history, we've analyzed the politics.
Right.
Let's circle back to the film itself as a piece of art. Despite all the inaccuracies, the blacksmith Balian, the pacifist king, the made-up romance, the modern politics, does the movie work?
You know, I think it does, especially the director's cut. If you can accept it for what it is, a historical fiction, a cinematic epic, not a documentary, I think it captures the atmosphere of that time brilliantly. The scale, the desperation, the clash of cultures. It feels true even when the facts aren't.
It feels epic. The production design, the costumes, it feels dirty and real and lived in, even if the plot points are wrong.
Yeah.
And the score, my God, the score by Harry Gregson Williams is just phenomenal.
It's an all-timer, and you have to acknowledge its impact. For better or for worse, when most people think of the Crusades now, the images they have in their heads are from this film.
That's true.
They think of the leper king and his silver mask. They think of Saladin as the wise, philosophical adversary. It has become the visual shorthand for that entire era for a generation of people.
And I think on a filmmaking level, the director's cut stands as this ultimate testament to the importance of editing. It is a masterclass in how you can't just hack 45 minutes of character and plot out of a story and expect it to survive.
Absolutely. It transforms what was a mediocre, confusing action movie into a thoughtful, sweeping, albeit historically loose epic about faith, conscience, and what it means to be a good man in a very bad time.
It really makes you wonder how many other bad movies out there are just one proper director's cut away from being considered classics.
That's a very provocative thought. Maybe there's a masterpiece version of Waterworld hiding in a vault somewhere.
Well, let's not get carried away.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of our journey to the 12th century. It's a complicated film about a very complicated time.
It certainly is.
We recommend if you watch this film, hunt down the director's cut. What did you think of Kingdom of Heaven? We'll see you next time.